Welcome back to Church Administration 202. In today's presentation, I want us to examine ministry stress and self-care. These are essential for the minister. Taking care of yourself is necessary to be your best for the Lord and for His work. What will you learn in today's narrated PowerPoint? Well, you will learn the reality of ministry stress. We will examine the health risks that a minister faces as they deal with the stress of ministry. I'll present to you 5 major stressors of a person who is engaged in ministry. We will define the word stress, and also we will define the word burnout. And toward the end of the presentation, I will challenge you to develop a self-care plan. Every minister needs to have a strategy for self-care. The Fuller Institute of Church Growth discusses isolation, that is, being alone, as a significant ministry stressor for pastors. 90% of ministers work more than 50 hours per week. I know several ministers who work 70 or 80 hours per week. It's a work week that mitigates against good health. Fuller found that 80% of ministers believe pastoral ministry affects their families in a negative way. I place this in red to emphasize that pastoral ministry does not need to impact our family negatively. 33% believe ministry is a hazard to their family. 75% of ministers reported a significant stress related to a crisis at least once in their ministry, and 50% felt themselves unable to meet the needs of the job, unable to meet the needs of their calling. This slide continues the statistics from the Fuller Institute of Church Growth. These statistics are alarming. 90% of ministers felt inadequately trained to cope with ministry demands. Actually, training is better now than it has ever been before. Even so, ministers say that their training was inadequate. 70% say that they have lower self-esteem now compared to when they started ministry. 40% report serious conflict with a parishioner at least once a month. And 37% confessed to engaging in inappropriate sexual behavior with someone in the church. Perhaps one of the most alarming statistics is that 70% of ministers do not have someone that they consider a close friend. Now, what about you? What's been your experience? Do these statistics say to you that you're isolated and that you need to develop more friendships? It's obvious that pastors or ministers need to get out from underneath the stress of isolation, and it can be done. This slide contains a sobering quote that comes from the New York Times. Quote, "Members of the clergy now suffer from obesity, hypertension, and depression at rates higher than most Americans. In the last decade, their use of antidepressants has risen while their life expectancy has fallen. Many would change jobs if they could." Close quotes. Does this sound right to you? Why or why not? You may want to pause this PowerPoint presentation at this time and think about this question. Does this sound right to you? Here are a few more alarming statistics that we must consider. Leadership Magazine, a subsidiary of Christianity Today, reports that ministers' marriages are suffering. 81% say they have insufficient time together as a couple. 71% say that a great stressor in their marriage is the use of money, and very much related to this, 70% say that their income levels are so low that it creates stress in their marriage. 64% complain of communication difficulties. 63% say congregational differences profoundly affect their marriages in a negative way. And then 57% say differences in leisure activities stress their marriage relationship. We continue looking at statistics on this slide. 53% of ministers have difficulties raising their children. Some of the children are simply out of control, and the parents don't seem to know how to rein the kids in. 46% report sexual problems. 41% talk about anger toward their spouses, which may be spread over a wide-ranging set of issues. 35% have differences over the ministry as a career. That is, are they called, or should they go into another field? And 25% have differences over the spouse's career. Now I encourage you to look at your own life. On a scale of 1 to 10, how is your marriage doing? A second question, would your spouse agree with your assessment? What would it take to make your marriage better by even 1 or 2 points? Will you do it? This would be a good place to just simply turn off the narrated PowerPoint and begin to think through your marriage and how it could be improved. Ministry Magazine has identified 5 major stressors in a minister's life. I want to review these for you. The 5 major stressors are mobility, that is moving, and we often move frequently. Compensation, it's pretty low at times. Time demands, we're always at the beck and call of church members or members of the community. Social support, having friends, and then boundaries. Let's look at these one at a time. Mobility. A minister's family is often uprooted from familiar surroundings to move to a new church ministry location. That disrupts the social networks. We leave friends behind, and there's a disengagement from social institutions that aid in our survival and well-being. That's a stressor, a major stressor. The average Southern Baptist pastor will move about every 2.5 years. And so our mobility is a huge stress factor with our families and our own lives. Compensation. Compensation for a minister is often low. A minister is in the top 10 vocation in terms of educational attainment, and yet compensation is often low. As a matter of fact, out of 425 identified occupations, ministry ranks 325th in terms of the compensation they receive. When someone from your church unfairly says that you're only in it for the money, you might just quote to them the fact that of the 425 occupations, we rank 325th in terms of compensation. That provides a financial strain and causes marital dissatisfaction and family instability and family distress. All of this can be tied to low compensation. Another major stressor is time demands. A minister is always on call. There's always that tyranny of the telephone call coming late at night. Someone needs help with perhaps physical, emotional, or spiritual needs, and it saps our physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. When the minister is running out to take care of, say, various church members that are in a crisis, it just saps the energy that we have. It robs your family of vitality, and it impedes the parent-child relationship. Therefore, you must create time to build your relationship with your family members, your wife and your children. And then social support. If meeting social needs is characterized by openness, challenge, accountability, abiding reciprocal friendships, ministry does not allow for such interactions. There is an anti-friendship kind of norm. That is, the minister is not to have any close friends. At least that's the opinion of some church members. The minister often befriends those who do not enjoy being befriended. The pedestal effect is in place. So many place the pastor or the minister on a very high pedestal, and therefore they don't want to really have much to do with us. According to one report, social support was the unique predictor of life satisfaction for the clergy and their spouses. Who has your back? Who is your Jonathan? Who takes care of you? Who is your Nathan? And then what about boundaries? One quote said about this in terms of ministers, I quote, "They enjoy little physical and emotional space," close quote. There are constraints to the ministry and high expectations and demands, and as a result, there are few suitable boundaries around our lives. Those that we have sometimes are not sustainable. The ministry certainly does have some great stressors, but we have a great God, don't we? That God can provide for us even in the area of mobility, compensation, time demands, social support, and boundaries. On this slide, you will be presented two definitions that will be important to you in ministry. One is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a state of tension and preoccupation with the individual or cumulative trauma of clients as manifested in one or more ways. Compassion fatigue means that you have become tired of caring for a person or for persons that have needs, and the crisis that comes into their lives is then transferred to your life. Compassion fatigue can be with one individual or it can be with many individuals, like an entire congregation. And then burnout can be defined as the cumulative stress that develops into a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by depletion of resources to cope. And it can come with many kinds of work, but particularly it is seen in the ministry. When burnout was rearing its ugly head in my own personal life, I could sense that I was getting short-tempered and irritable in doing ministry. I didn't want to be around people. Interruptions bothered me. And so I would usually just take some time off, maybe 2 days. I was able then to renew my energy and recharge my battery, and also redevelop my relationship with the Lord, and it invigorated me. Pay attention to what your body is saying. Learn when you're experiencing compassion fatigue or burnout, and take steps to correct that. What are some of the causes of burnout or compassion fatigue? Well, when we see suffering going on around us, it causes us to have compassion fatigue or burnout sometimes. Ministers need to be replenished, and in our line of work, it needs to be on a regular basis. We lack that. Unresolved personal trauma can also be a cause of compassion fatigue. Pain and powerless people, and we see that often. We see very poor people, and we see the culture taking advantage of those people, and it brings a hurt to the depths of our lives. And then there's the loss of patience. When a death occurs, you may be present or you may be close to that person, and that can cause a great deal of stress on a pastor. Witnessing the death or the dying of someone that we love while performing our duties, it's firsthand exposure to death, and it can be a very beautiful experience, but it does cause us to be prone to experience compassion fatigue or burnout. I've had the privilege of being with a number of people who have taken their last breath, and it's usually a blessing to release them into the hand of a loving God, but it brings stress on us. And then our multiple roles that we play. We are the pastor. Sometimes we're the counselor. Sometimes we play the role of a lawyer, although we're not qualified to do so. It's amazing the number of roles that we play. It can cause us to move into a place of emotional depletion. We have a lack of social support. And then there's a sense of not appreciating the danger of empathy. We need boundaries in our lives due to the multiple roles that we face. A lack of social support systems and not appreciating the danger of empathy can all lead us to a point of being emotionally drained, emotionally worn out. Since we've talked about compassion fatigue and burnout, I thought it would be good for us to look at some of the symptoms we should watch for. First of all, let's look at behavioral symptoms. And I'm just going to list some symptoms that we should watch for. These behavioral symptoms will crop up in your body, and we need to listen to what our body says to us. You should evaluate your own life to see if any of these are issues that you need to cope with. In this area, we would say that impatience is a symptom, irritability, becoming withdrawn, hypervigilance, losing things, appetite changes. To continue our list of behavioral symptoms, they include regression, accident proneness, risk taking, addictive behavior, lack of self-care, a heightened, startled response, or moodiness. And then there are symptoms that we could call affective symptoms. Let me read a list of those. Anxiety, guilt, anger that can turn into rage, fearfulness, survival guilt, numbness, depression, sadness, an emotional roller coaster, being overly sensitive, feeling depleted. And then there are symptoms that could be categorized as somatic. That is, they show up in your behavior or in your body. And they would include shock, breathing difficulties, aches and pains, dizziness, an impaired immunity system, and exhaustion. And then there's another category. There are symptoms that might show up in your workplace. There is low morale and motivation, errors in judgment, increasing transference. Be careful of that one. Counter issues, poor communication, staff conflicts, apathy, absenteeism, withdrawal, being late for work, fear of being perceived as weak. Now let's look at a fifth area, and these symptoms would present themselves in interpersonal relationships, and they include conflict, isolation, ethical violations, a dread of working with people, sexual dysfunction, loss of boundaries, and mistrust. And then one that is certainly crucial for us as ministers are spiritual symptoms. And there are two that I would mention here: questioning spirituality, questioning God, and then questioning the meaning of life and the purpose that we have. Are any of these symptoms present in your life right now? What are you doing about it? I would encourage you to seek help. We've discussed the effects of stress on a person's life. We've talked about some of the causes of burnout and compassion fatigue. Now I want to talk about some preventive measures that you can take to ensure that your health will be strong in the days to come. Maintain physical exercise. I would encourage you, as my physician has encouraged me, to be engaged in exercise 3 or 4 times a week. Finding meaning and purpose in your work. I hope that your work and ministry that God has called you to do is something you enjoy doing, and that when you get up, there's no dread, but you enjoy the purposeful, meaningful work that God's given you to do. Develop coping skills. One of the ways I cope with stress and pressure is physical exercise, but another method that I use is reading. Another method that I've used over the years is just simply to share the good news of Jesus with those that have a need to know. And then sustaining social support. I encourage you to develop a support system. If you can gather a group of ministers and engage in a support system for one another, you will prolong your ministry at the place that you're serving today and the place you will serve in the future. And you'll be a much healthier pastor or minister. Practice peace and a sabbatical rest. That means you take a clean day off and that you don't allow anything to come in the way of your day off unless it's an absolute crisis or an emergency. Sabbath rest is a biblical principle that every minister should practice. Practice the sabbatic rest. And then exercise sound sleep routines. We need to get the proper amount of sleep, and every person has a different biological rhythm that requires differing amounts of sleep. Some can function quite adequately on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, whereas others require 8 or 10 hours of sleep. You find your routine and get in it. And then I would encourage you, obviously, to practice spiritual disciplines. Every person needs to have discipline in their life. There's the discipline of purity, the discipline of devotion, the discipline of spending time in the Bible every day, the discipline of prayer, the discipline of worship. I'm not talking about the corporate worship you lead in your church. I'm talking about personal worship, individual worship, because you can't really worship corporately until you first have private worship. There is the discipline of the tongue, the discipline of leadership, the discipline of giving, the discipline of witnessing, and the discipline of ministry. All these are helpful in preventing stress from taking an undue toll on you physically, mentally, and spiritually. Now let me share with you 18 things that will be helpful for you in your self-care strategy. Number 1, take stock of what's on your plate. Is there too much there? Are you required to do way more than you're capable of doing? then get something off your plate. Number 2, find time for yourself every day. That may simply be time to read a book, or go jogging, or spend time with your family. But find time for yourself each and every day. Number 3, learn to delegate. Learn to ask for help. Help at home and help at work. Practice the Jethro principles that we learned in Church Administration 201. Have a transition time from home to work. Try to leave those things at work that need to stay at work. Don't carry them home to stew over. Focus on your home and building a strong marriage and a strong family. On this slide, we continue to discuss some helpful self-care strategies. Number 5, learn to say no and yes more often. Say no to the things that you just simply cannot do, and say yes to those things that you are passionate about, or that energizes you or motivates you, or you're just passionate about it. Number 6, assess your trauma inputs. When you have a death in your church family, that's a trauma or a wound that's been inflicted on you. Recognize that wound and take the time that's necessary for it to heal. Number 7, learn to recognize compassion fatigue. We've talked about that at length already in this session. And then have an accountability partner. Consider joining a peer support group. I would encourage you to be a part of a small group that would hold each other accountable. Join a support group. Here are a few more self-help tips and techniques for you to consider. Self-care strategy number 9, preserve your family time. Put your family time on a schedule, on a calendar, and so you'll meet their needs. Protect your privacy and maintain boundaries. Number 11, clarify expectations. Typically, the best time to do this is when you first go to a church. However, you can renegotiate your expectation of the church and their expectations of you, even after you've been there for a while. And if you need to do it, do it. Number 12, build friendships and social support. Don't be isolated. Don't be alone. Number 13, maintain physical exercise, proper nutrition, and proper sleep patterns. Now, number 14 is to find purpose and meaning in your work. 15 is to practice an absolute Sabbath rest. Number 16, practice religious and spiritual disciplines. Number 17, make use of clergy retreat resources. And last, number 18, seek help before you hit the bottom. Notice that is in red to underline the importance of not waiting until it is too late. I highly encourage you to practice good self-care. In the next assignment, I want you to watch a brief video. It's about Pastor Wayne Cordeiro. He learned from his mistakes, and he finally learned how to fill his tank. You'll understand what that means after you watch the video. Now, this is the end of the presentation. Go and practice good self-care.